Good evening and welcome to RaceSpotTV and to yet another round of Friday night primetime where we take a trip across the Atlantic to the Nürburgring, a circuit famed in motorsport, though for everyone's sanity we only embark around the Grand Prix layout of the circuit and not the full Nordschleife. The IMSA iRacing series has proven magnificent so far. We expect no less tonight. It is myself, Zach Sweeney, with Altus Esports' newest recruit in William Chadwick and Hugo Luis pointing the cameras at Split 1 tonight. Will, welcome in. What's to expect?
Well, I think we're going to expect a really good race here tonight. I think we're going to see a really good battle in specifically the GTD class, but we also have chance for a repeat winner for the first time this season in our broadcast event in LMP2. So there's a lot to look out for tonight, and I'm really excited for the action.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, as we've seen so far, here is the schedule of the IMSA iRacing series. Today, we're round number 9 with the Nürburgring Grand Prix Strecke on February 10th. In a week's time, we go to Road America Detroit and then Sebring to round off the 12-week season number 1 of 2023. We started the broadcasts of this season all the way back at round number 4 for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and what a journey it's been since. And yeah, as Will very correctly said, we could very much well have a first repeat winner, which I think does speak volumes about the competitiveness of this series. Of course, it is only an official sort of server, so no championship or anything like that. We don't often expect repeat people to be in the server week in, week out, but the fact that not a single person has been able to duplicate a win so far, I think says a lot about just how competitive this series can be.
Oh, 100%, Zach. I mean, the series is always competitive week on week, and especially this week, as we've got a 4K SOF strength of field, so basically your quality, your skill of the drivers, averaged between the number of cars in each class. So that means each class is above 4K, which is really good for these types of events, especially on something that's, you know, just an evening thing for a lot of these drivers and just a bit of fun. So a 4K SOF for all of these classes tonight is really good.
Oh, absolutely. And, well, you can see now on board with the number 17 machine. Following around now outside in towards the final sector of the Nürburgring. Talking of qualifying, we're in it now. Only 2 minutes left, sort of into the dying stages of it. People rounding off their final laps. Well, how important is track position going to be at a circuit like the Nürburgring? I mean, we're not taking to the Nordschleife, which would be a different story completely. But the Grand Prix layout, how's it looking in terms of overtaking?
Yeah, I think the Grand Prix layout is a track you can definitely overtake at. You know, you've got your hard braking zones into the final chicane. You've got, again, another really hard braking zone into turn number 1. There's a lot of passing opportunities here. Of course, dirty air is always going to play its factor. But I think overall, Nürburgring is one of the better tracks to pass. You don't have too many long, fast sweeping corners, which tend to restrict overtaking because of the distance you have to follow at. So yeah, I think we'll have some good racing today. Sebastian exit that final chicane. That chicane is so hard to do, by the way. The way that these cars need to go over those bumps to get the maximum speed possible is really risky, and often you see people invalidating the laps there. Particularly,
I suppose, maybe in the prototype classes as well. It's maybe a little bit more prominent in those?
Well, of course, the prototypes tend to have a bit less suspension travel. I mean, all of these cars are super, super low to the ground. You know, you're seeing ride heights of 50, 60 millimeters in all classes here, which is nothing. And it's crazy to think about how low these cars really are to the ground. But yeah, your prototypes tend to be a bit stiffer, more likely to bounce in a funny way potentially when you're mounting a large curb, which might, you know, I think when you go across different classes, your approach and your mentality to how you take these curbs changes. So all these drivers are more than skilled enough to adjust their approaches as per.
For sure, and with qualifying drawing to a close, we will get the grid up as soon as we can, running through our 3 classes of the BMW M Hybrid V8, the Dallara P217, and of course the IMSA 23 for the GTDs. Here for the IMSA iRacing series, the 9th round of Friday night prime time, season number 1 in 2023, and what a season it has so far proven to be. Here they are then for the BMW M Hybrid V8. It's Simon Collarts that takes pole position. John Bennett alongside him, 3 tenths down, but will share each other's company on the front row row. Will Lyon and Friedrich 3 and 4. Goran Glerum the top 5. Noah Chiller P6 just alongside him there, just over a second covering the top 6 in qualifying. Dylan Frackleton, David Sorando and Alexander Gerber the grid for the BMWs. We then take a look at the Dallara P217, and it's the Magny Core winner, the undercut sim racing winner of Adrian Leidinger, who takes pole position, very marginally ahead of Theodoris in P2. Dean Woods P3 with Valentin Boni, the pole sitter's teammate, in 4th, with Hersug in 5th. Stephen Phillips rounds off the 3rd row in 6th. Mike Hart P7 with Salveston in 8th. Pignesi and Kroner your top 10, with Andura the back end of the LMP2 field. Luka Vunch, a driver tipped as favourite for the GTDs, takes pole position ahead of Life Sebastian. Hendrik Kraus and Francis McGinn 3 and 4, with the number 5 machine of Luca the top 5. Then comes Salafranca in 6th in that BMW. Then comes Vale 7th. Di Paolo alongside him on the 4th row, with Mohart and the 33 machine, the Lamborghini, rounding off the top 10. Stephen Davis and Sean Romig 11th and 12th. And as per usual, the biggest grid of all, Jonathan Clement rounds off the 13 car field of those that did manage to get a lap time in qualifying. Well, I mean, Will, we've got a pretty close competitive field. I'm really looking forward to seeing how today shapes up.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. You know, you can see the track conditions on the left. Very cold track today. That makes for very fast times. Of course, the air temp and the track temp have a massive factor to how quick these cars can go around the circuit here this evening, and this is pretty much optimum. These cars are going to be setting the fastest lap times we might even see all week, especially with the pressure that is on some of these drivers. You know, you've got to look at the GTD class to see how competitive the front of that field is, and you know, with someone like Luka Vunch holding the second fastest average race laps of this week, you could see maybe a break of that in tonight's race.
Now getting underway for the formation lap, a full formation lap here for the Nürburgring. Actually, no, it's not. They're starting quite far behind not too far behind in the final sector of the circuit. So we might be able to get underway straight away here for the IMSA iRacing series. Before we get underway, Will, what are your predictions? What are you thinking? I know it's a tough call, but who's coming out on top today?
Bennett in GTP, Leidinger for the first repeat win in LMP2, and I can't look past Vunch for GTD.
Well, here we go. That's William Chadwick's very insightful information into the race today. Simon Cowlart comes into the pit lane off the start to, well, surprisingly, maybe start from the pit lane for today, which is weird. But anyway, John Bennett will then take the realms at the start, at the front of the field to signal us underway for round number 9 here at the Nürburgring. We are go. The IMSA iRacing series. The GTPs get themselves underway as they barrel their way downhill braking zone for turn number 1, and John Bennett leads them down in towards the first braking zone. It's Friedrich and Lyon that are battling out. There comes the P217s getting themselves underway as well, not a moment behind. Then in the background you can see the GTDs getting themselves underway, and Luka Vunch holds the lead commandingly ahead of Henrik Kraus and Life Sebastian, who's unfortunately not gotten the best launch. Side by side, up and down for the most part. A fairly uniform start, and people just taking it easy and settling in nicely.
Yeah, and fear not, Simon Kraus fans, it was just a safety car we were on board with going into the pit lanes. Simon still retains the lead of this race with John Bennett behind. But yeah, I mean, easy mistake to make, as we see, I think that's Nolan DH in the background, have an incident as we're watching the start of the race. It's always an interesting factor in these faster type classes, how you kind of build up and warm up to the race, because they're pretty hard cars to drive. And you know, with the dirty air being as big as it can be with these high downforce cars, it's important to sometimes make moves when you're close off the start at such a slow rolling speed. So you tend to see people being aggressive. Oh, that's such an easy mistake to make, just getting caught out by the car ahead, and that's not an ideal start for that car to start this race, but I'm sure we'll see them bounce back.
Yeah, for sure. Still 43.5 minutes left to go. A little bit shaky for one of the P2s. Dean Woods just in behind Stephen Phillips, who got a little bit squirrely, and that could open the door for the number 8 machine to have a bit of a look there down the sort of back flat out section of the circuit, up into P4 then for Dean Woods, and into the final chicane for the first time. And yeah, as Will very correctly pointed out, to make me look like an absolute idiot, it is Simon Cowlart that leads the way ahead of John Bennett, Will Lyon and Andreas Friedrich, with Robin Glerum your top 5 in the GTPs. Adrian Leidinger and Valentin Boni 1 and 2 in the LMP2s. Interesting dynamic then. Will, 2 teammates leading the way as we cut back side by side amongst some of the GTPs. The fight for P4 rages on.
yeah, as we see the fight for P4 now into this really tight and twisty section, such a technical sector of the opening of the GP loop, we see it peter out pretty nicely there. But like you say, like you mentioned, Valentin Boni had such a good start. You know, the undercut sim racing driver. We saw him earlier this season at Magny-Cours, which I had the pleasure of commentating on with my second favourite commentator.
Who's first? Who's first, huh?
Arjuna. And yeah, no, like you say, very good start from 4th position to get up to 2nd. It's, you know, it's a really good start to this race. It helps because obviously, like we say, you know, making moves count while the dirty air is low right at the start when you're at a lower speed. It's really important, and that's such a good start to this race to help maybe Boni deny Leidinger from the double win in the broadcast races we've done this season. But you know, we'll have to find out. Still 42 minutes to go.
I mean, if you think back to Magny-Cours, it was an interesting affair for the undercut guys, wasn't it? I mean, at some point, Valentin Boni was leading the way, and then I think it was Leidinger that spun, and then Boni took the lead, and then Boni ended up spinning, and then Leidinger retook the lead. It was very interesting, very awkward for them, and each and every single one of them, I think, had a sniff of victory. There were 3 undercut sim racing drivers on the field for Magny-Cours, and all 3 of them sort of had their opportunity to try and get the win. So Valentin Boni is essentially looking to bounce back and maybe sort of get the bragging rights amongst the undercut sim racing guys. But hey ho, there's still 41 minutes of racing action left to go, and an interesting fight starting to materialize. 2 wide, 2 rows deep, and they fight for 11th amongst some of the GTDs, or the fight for 10th, I stand corrected. Stephen David having a bit of a look to the inside of the 33 machine. A very interesting battle starting to manifest itself here in the very early stages, but already 4 cars battling it out. But this early on, all they're doing is hurting themselves, surely, Will.
Yeah, well, they've got a gap to the cars ahead. It's the battle for 10th here. Oh, no, my word, that's ridiculously close into the braking zone between the number 32 of Lars Weissig and Stephen David. I think, yeah, it's interesting to see how this plays out. Of course, they've got a decent gap to the cars ahead, so they're more than welcome to race each other, but you do have to kind of think about your strategy and kind of assess your pace. I mean, if you know you're not going to get any better than 10th, then why not fight? But, you know, it always opens up, you know, people can make mistakes ahead and stuff, so you don't want to waste too much time, but, you know, that's what we're here to do tonight. We're here to race, and I'm sure these guys are enjoying themselves.
Race is a race at the end of the day, so I'd rather this than everyone be spread out 10 seconds apart and not fighting. So hey, it might be hurting their races, but it's certainly given us a good time up in the commentary booth. 4 cars then fighting for top 10, which in all fairness, Will, it's a decent position to get. You know, you sort of have different milestones in a race. Everyone wants to win, but then a podium, top 5, top 10, you know, it's a decent milestone, and to, you know, get yourself inside the top 10 sounds better than finishing P11 or P12.
Absolutely. You know, not everyone here is necessarily racing to get a win. When you're in a top split race, the guys at the front, you know, like Furnish, like Cruz, are very good. So you've got to kind of measure your expectations of what you can get from a race. And sometimes people, you know, a top 10 is a really good result. You might not have been able to get one in top split so far this week, or so far ever in iRacing. You don't know kind of how these drivers have fared over the course of the subscriptions to the iRacing.com service. But as long as you're setting your ambitions and goals in a good place, you're going to have fun, and hopefully we don't see any crashes, because that's when you start to have less fun.
Yeah, that's true, especially with your teammate due to netcode at Road Atlanta. Hey, Will. But anyway, no, it was bound to happen at some point. I do apologise. Great way to start your team debut at Altus, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it was fantastic. You know, thanks for bringing it up. But I suppose I threw you under the bus with the safety cars. So you know, it's all fun. Back.
That's true. While Cam's not here, it's just me and Will absolutely taking shots at each other. So don't, you know, pay-per-view for me versus Will Chadwick. I'm sure that'd be an interesting scrap. You know, forget KSI versus Jake Paul. It's me and Will Chadwick at it. What's the good? The O2 Arena. Let's go for that one. We'll get that.
The O2 Arena. I was thinking just a commentary booth, but you know.
Oh, let's do that. Either one, mate. Either one. I'll do it anywhere, anytime. We'll have a scrap. I think there's a bit of an age discrepancy with you being an O2 baby and all. But anyway, we have got a race at hand with 38 minutes left of it. We ride on board with the LMP2 of Mike Hart at the moment in P8, but very, very close to this train of a good number of cars actually, tailing off at the top 5 with Stephen Phillips. Then comes Salvesen, Herzog, Mike Hart just in behind. Only a couple of seconds back is Moritz Kroner with Pugnesi just in behind him there. So the P2s are actually shaping themselves up to be quite a close field. This could spark pretty much any moment.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've got reasonably close field. You know, there's quite a large gap between 4th and 5th, but that makes it the battle for the top 5. You know, of course, one of the stats that your iRacing profile picks out, top 5s. So one of these drivers in this group, I mean, depending on what happens at the front, we know how crazy Magny Core was at the end. But one of these drivers is going to get that start on the little license thing. But we've got Stephen Phillips trying around the outside, not quite going to work. I mean, it's a very, very tight corner, and you really have to stick it really deep into the braking zone, keep it on the outside, and then you might get the outside for the next corner. But it's not worked out for Phillips, but I'm sure there's going to be more opportunities as this race goes on. You know, we've got Herzog behind, also trying to make up some places. But yeah, this like 5th to 8th battle is looking really interesting at the moment.
For sure, and while we wait for sort of the leaders, I mean, Karl Lutz and the BMWs just up ahead is about a second clear of Bennett. So, you know, while we're waiting for the leaders to sort themselves out and close the gap and actually decide to start fighting each other, we're going to have to settle on some pretty good midfield fights, in all fairness. But yeah, unfortunately, Stephen Phillips trialing and failing to the outside of turn 1, probably due, I guess, to the fact that the inside of turn 1, the racing line, is very cambered, which is surely going to help the rotation of the driver on the inside versus the driver on the outside. It must just be very difficult to actually get that rotation whilst being on the outside of turn 1 to be able to have at least a decent look into the inside of turn 2. But with that being said, then where do you make the moves if you've got a driver so stubborn to defend everywhere around the circuit?
Just send it up the inside. Send the dummy. No, I mean, that's something you couldn't do. But I think there's a lot of opportunities at this track. You know, like we talked about, you know, that run off the chicane like we're watching right now, you know, the cars are bouncing around. You can easily get into traction control too much, and that causes you to have obviously a worse run into the final corner. So, you know, you can stick it up the inside there. You can maybe do a late move down the inside. Of course, it is possible for the driver on the inside to take too much of that sort of dipper effect into turn 1, which can definitely upset the car. And, you know, by the way you look at it, if you can force a driver really, really inside, it may turn out to your advantage rather than your disadvantage being on the inside.
As Will Chadwick said, I mean, you know, he's very experienced in terms in the world of. What is your I rating actually? It's like 6 to 8K, something like that.
6 to 8. You know, it's quite a large range.
Between that range, it's one of the two. Which one is it?
I think. Well, it's like above 8.3 or something. I don't know.
Fair enough. There we go.
So it doesn't matter anyway.
Doesn't matter anyway. Well,
no,
he's
iRacing
decent.
iRacing doesn't matter. I'm all right.
He's decent at iRacing, so take your word for it. Take his word for it when it comes to his expertise. Speaking of pivotal moments in this race, actually, we're now getting the first wave through of traffic. The BMW M Hybrid V8s lapping the GTDs for the first time, about 11 minutes into this race. Of course, Collards and Bennett are trying to get their way through the field as quickly as possible. But you can see how stacked the GTDs are. They're very close together, so that's gonna be a headache sort of for the BMWs to negotiate their way through. I mean, fortunately catching them probably at the best of times down the pit straight, but very late on the brakes is David, and darting their way to the inside is one of the BMWs. It's going to spark fights, I think, in both categories. Having a bit of a look to turn 2, but backing out of it on that particular occasion for David. I think traffic definitely is going to lend itself to both give and take to both the prototypes and the GTs in this race.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting one, because when prototypes get restless and unhappy and impatient, it can cause many issues. But you know, it's all measured at the end of the day, because you know, if you can save half a second through traffic, it's more than you'll probably ever gain through perfecting your lap, depending obviously on how you can manage things. But yeah, I mean, it's always going to be interesting. You know, we see another GTP come to the inside, and you can see how much it closes up. You know, David is now much closer to the back of the number 33 here, and it gives him the chance to get a better run. Of course, there's still a decent gap going through the Michael Schumacher S's, but yeah, it's an interesting one because it can cause a lot of issues, but at the end of the day, it does improve the racing, and it's all part of multi-class racing as a whole, really, because it's a skill that you need to have as a GT3 to manage these GTPs to do what you want to do. I mean, especially when you get to really high-end competitions, and notably, a point of this is like Daytona, for example, where you actually end up, you see the GT3s manipulating their line to manipulate the GTPs to go a certain way. So you're always kind of got a half your eye or one eye on the mirror, and depending on how you manage that can really impact the result of your race.
Sure, I mean, it's a skill that you do have to learn, and it's one that experience really lends itself well. Not necessarily just doing loads of races in the GTs, but doing ones in the GTs and the P2s in the top class of that said multi-class race, just to get a feel of what it's like. You can then put yourself in those shoes to understand maybe a little bit better as to what they're going to do, how they're going to approach the situation. But with multi-class racing, with endurance racing, with any discipline of racing, it doesn't matter if you could churn out thousands upon thousands of laps and get really, really quick, but then get into a race situation, you become overwhelmed and you panic and really don't settle into the race dynamic. The best teacher is to just get out there, do some of those multi-class races. Yes, maybe you might be really, really bad for the first few, but you use those experiences to bounce back for future races, and over time, that experience, trial and error, will teach you a pretty damn good amount of knowledge to say, okay, so I did this in this race and it didn't work out, so I'm going to change that. I'm going to try something different for the future race, and it really does help. Again, experience is a big thing when it comes to multi-class racing.
Yeah, and looking towards our comment section, our wonderful comment section on YouTube, feel free, if any of you want to ask us questions, to pop something down into the comments. But we've got Lewis McLeod looking into the comments and cheering for John A. Bennett. Something we talked about before we got on this broadcast, driving for, I think it's Carlin in F3 this year in the British series. So accomplished driver in the real world, of course. Lewis RaceSpot's own commentates on that series in real life, so it's good to see the crossover and the opportunities given to all these commentators, and cheering for his man. So we'll see if he can get the result.
Yeah, I mean, commentators do have their favourite drivers. I mean, Luke Crane loves a bit of Enzo Benito. We've now got Lewis McLeod with John Bennett. They do take their fancy, so it's nice to see that Lewis McLeod is in the YouTube comment section cheering him on. And I do know the Nürburgring, Lewis. I know you are watching along, you're listening to that, and you are going to absolutely rinse me for my track knowledge. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus so you can't. But regardless of which, John Bennett isn't actually doing too bad. He's shared some real-life successes, and that's transferred into the sim. And I guess, talking of sim racing, real life racing, that crossover, it's helping John Bennett out quite well to stay on the back of Simon Coulthard.
Yeah, 100%. Driving with Race Clutch for 2023, famously, I think Race Clutch tend to be better in the prototype classes. They're a bit more of a prototypey team if you want to assign them to any sort of class. And, they've had drivers such as Owen Carl in their ranks, in previous years, of course, now in Apex Racing Academy. But, oh my, jeez, I just thought that was really, really close. But like we were saying, plenty of good drivers to learn off, and it's really important to have that type of person to give you advice and to learn off, and it can really help you in these sorts of situations. Of course, attacking when you're the car behind in such a high downforce car does require a certain amount of over pace, and it's an interesting skill. But we've got this battle for 10th again. I'm absolutely loving it. It's been such a good battle. But it's still fighting for it between the Ferrari and the Lamborghini, and more flashing of headlights. We love to see that.
We do. People are down each other's throats, really. I mean, when you're in a fight this close, it's natural that people are going to get a little bit argy-bargy and a little bit frustrated, particularly when you've got the prototypes working their way through, flashing their headlights frantically at you, saying, I'm going to send it down the inside of you here now, so you better move out of the way or we're both seeing Jesus. But that's unfortunately not how it works. It is the prototype's job to lap safely, lap responsibly, and the GT's job is just to keep it nice and calm, stay on the race line, and to be predictable, most importantly. And you can see that now with the P2s now working their way through catching them into the braking zone. That's a bit of a look in towards turn 1 versus the Lamborghini, who very graciously gives him some space. But yeah, a bit of a dive there from the P2. That's one of the undercut cars, I do believe, and that might be Valentin Boni potentially, and losing quite a bit of time actually stuck behind these GTs versus his teammate of Adrian Leidinger, and that is really slowing himself down. Unfortunately, it's a little bit further back. It's that fight between Stephen Phillips right on the back of Salvesen in P5. And these are deciding moments really for P2s, is moments like this in traffic where your rival gets a really good run, like we just saw there with Salvesen. Phillips, though, going to be kicking himself that he didn't get past that Lamborghini sooner.
This is a GTD stuff of nightmares. Of course, the pace delta being only 9 or 10 seconds between the LMP2s and the GTDs makes it that much harder to pass. And actually, one of the more important things is in the traction zones, the LMP2s are much slower than the GTDs, so it counts for an interesting factor. We look back to the front of our field in the GTP class. We've got John A. Bennett continuing to attack Simon Klarsler, and sorry for butchering the name, but
we're British, yeah, but it's fine.
We're British. It's part of our nature. It's clear to me here that Bennett has more pace. We saw him make the mistake in the chicane, brought it back to 4 tenths or something at the line last lap, 6 tenths currently, or just under. It's clear at this moment in time that Bennett has more pace, and this is where you've got to sit here and start thinking about what strategies you can implement in order to get the jump. Now, you can pit 1 or 2 laps before, that's not going to hinder you too much, or you can maybe try and go a little bit longer. You know, if you can save a bit of fuel in this situation by being close, you only need a second, half a second in the box to make that jump. And this is where it gets really tactical for these drivers, because of course there's nothing for Bennett to worry about behind in terms of P3 at the moment, so his focus is completely forward and completely on getting this win here tonight. And that's where we kind of start to see strategy come into play, and I think it's going to be interesting throughout the course of this race to see kind of what strategy Bennett implements to try and make this overtake if he can't make it on pure pace on the track.
Oftentimes the races are won or lost in the pit lane. You more so speak of that in sort of endurance style races, but it's even just as true in sort of, I guess, sprint style in these 45-minute races. Anytime there's a pit stop involved, even if it's just as simple as maybe changing tires or putting a little bit of fuel in, there is a strategical dynamic to be taken into account. Where do you come out after the pit lane sequence? I mean, it's all good having a theoretical basis, but if your data says, oh, the optimal time is to pit on this lap, but if you put on said lap, you might come out behind some GT traffic or P2 traffic or whatever. You want to be able to be in the best position to be as quick for the majority of the race. You don't want to, you know, come into the pit lane and be stuck behind a massive traffic of GTs. You want to come out and have some clear air to really maximize your pace for the longest amount of time. So John Bennett is going to be trying his absolute best to put his best foot forward and to get his foot in the door, because, well, for the last 20 minutes or so, he's really been struggling to put any pressure on Simon Quarlartz, who's been sort of indestructible, very composed throughout the entirety of this race so far. But a bit of GT traffic spicing up the fight in the LMP2s. Kim Salvesen under a bit of pressure now from Stephen Phillips. They run too wide as they run their way down the pit straight. Downhill braking, of course, for turn number 1, outside line and trying to hang on, but inside, of course, for Salvesen, who manages to hang on to 5th place for now. Stephen Phillips, though, hammering the pressure on, still side by side as they run their way through turn 2, downhill in towards turn 3, and a fantastic display of racing between the two of them so far.
That was ridiculously close between the two Dallara P217 drivers, LMP2, whatever you want to call the class. It does kind of expose, you know, what I was saying into turn 1. You know, you can obviously get that run back round the next corner. So we're seeing some more rather large sends on GTD cars. Of course, something to note there is when we were watching the number 10 of Mario Salafanca, we saw him defend into the final corner, which stopped the LMP2s from sending it up the inside, and that was a really smart move to help him in his fight against Luca Loffredi.
Speaking of,
oh no, I've done
Mario
it.
Salafranca. No, Lewis is in the chat. You can't say anything about a commentator's curse. It's poor driving, unfortunately. We're hopefully going to take a look as to how this happened. A bit of a replay you can see. Oh, that's unfortunate. Really, really unfortunate. Not only did it happen once, it happened twice. almost really could have corrected that to not be as bad as it was, but a slight tap with the spilling LMP2, the 27 machine that is a Pugnesi, made a bit of a tap with one, and the other one sent round spinning into the side of him. In all honesty, he didn't have any part in that, really. You could argue he was just a passenger to the P2s, and unfortunately that was his demise.
Yeah, I mean, especially the second P2, you know, that was just kind of a panic situation from the number 27. I believe to be the number, yeah, it was the number 27. However, the number 10 did, for me, kind of turn in to the LMP2 on the inside. Could have expected the LMP2 to go a little bit deeper. However, the initial contact was started himself, but then again, the 27 was always coming in way too hot and locking up, so I think it would have been the case anyway. But it's really unfortunate, especially considering the driving that he's done so far in this race. And I'm sorry for Mario for talking about you at your time of demise.
Oh, inside line for the number 20. That was a very late lunge into that right-hander, but a good effort, just not quite good enough for Stephen Phillips in his pursuit of a top 5. They've been chopping and changing for the entire race. And I think it's situations like this, Will, where you're constantly running your way through traffic and again having a bit of a look to the inside. They're going to run 2 wide as they run their way up the Schumacher S, boxed in by the number 2 Lamborghini, 3 wide as they run their way in. Both of them getting the measure. Outside line for Stephen Phillips, gets his way past, up into the top 5 in spectacular fashion. What a move, and what a way to use lap traffic. I was just going to say he might have to use something different in terms of strategy, but no, get himself a Lamborghini to work with, and well, he's worked his way up into his 5th.
Phillips and Salveson have been working really closely, fighting really closely together for the last few laps, and it's been incredibly close. I would love to see the onboard of Luca there in the number 2 Lamborghini Euronics car this evening. I'd be absolutely terrified if I was at the front of that field. I was thinking, I'm dead. This is my time. I'm done. But it got away with it. They were actually very clean with the way that they did the maneuver. But yeah, I would have been panicking if I was in that GTD car.
Yeah, because again, you are just a passenger. You're putting a lot of trust in those around you and into not necessarily the quickest corner on the circuit, but certainly one of the toughest because of its high speed and its small margin for error. The Schumacher S isn't particularly a corner you want to go too wide in, let alone 3 wide into class into. So yeah, definitely a sketchy moment, but no harm, no foul. And well, it's one of those where you either look like a hero or just a zero if it goes wrong. It's very much a risk versus reward. And here's Hugo Luis with answering our prayers here. Talk us through it then from Luca Bunch's point of view. You can see in his rearview mirror, Will, this is just not what you want at all. Yeah,
absolute panic. You know, you see the little TV screen that all of these GTDs come fitted with these days, at least the newer ones, and you can see the LMP2 up so close behind. It's so hard. I just watched another thing as well. Hendrik Cruz almost got into a collision with the number 27 as we see our first GTP hit. I think that's fairly soon in the race to be pitting, but you know, it's all part of the strategy. Something we haven't really talked about over these last few laps as well is that John Bennett has fallen back quite a lot. I suspect due to traffic, I imagine. Doesn't look to be any damage on Bennett's car. However, I would imagine it is simply just down to traffic, which does now open it up, especially as we've seen those GTPs start to pit. It's going to be interesting now to see whether Bennett can close that gap back in once more and make an attempt to pass, maybe in pit lane or later in the race.
For sure. I mean, traffic is one of those things that does fluctuate quite often. I mean, at some points you can lose a couple of seconds, at others you can gain a couple of seconds. So everything is provisional, and do not count John Bennett at all out for a race victory, particularly as Will says in terms of the pit lane sequence coming very shortly for those BMWs. Usually we'd see it around sort of 15 minutes to go, but last time out at the Virginia International Raceway, we saw a different dynamic of people coming in really early or really late. But for the GTs, that's also starting with second place man of Cruz coming into the pit lane as well. And well, it's really kickstarting up and down the field with 20 minutes to go. But as you say, fairly soon in terms of what we're used to, a couple of minutes sooner than we would expect. What's the cause for that? I mean, the Nürburgring as a Grand Prix circuit isn't overly demanding on fuel, is it?
It can be. It depends on how you manage it. I think that's the case for most tracks. Probably a lap early for our GTD second place man in Cruz. What was the interesting fact is, with the new way that we have fueling and tyres at the same time, you can be a little bit cheeky. And I know a few people were doing this at VIR last week. It looks to me that Hendrick has took some form of tyres. He definitely has took a tyre at least. I imagine probably both the left-hand side tyres. And that's an interesting factor, really, because it gains you quite a bit of time if you can make it work. Of course, it will make the car slightly unbalanced, but as long as you're not taking really one tyre on a corner of a car, or front or just rears, for example, it should be okay. But it's an interesting thing to look at, because I don't imagine all drivers will be doing that in the pit stops. You know, we can expect drivers fueling, I imagine, what, 22 to 28 litres here this evening in the pit lane. And you know, with that amount of time, that amount of fuel left to go in the race, somewhat half a tank of the full capacity, it could prove a decisive factor in not only how far these front drivers get away from the rest of the pack, but maybe some other drivers lower down, if they pull that strategy off, they might be able to make some place for them.
I'm assuming maybe we're going to see it more so in drivers a little bit further down, because in a sense they've got less to lose. I mean, there's more risk playing a risky strategy if you are in a commanding leading position. But Luka Vanch also coming in, Life Sebastian into the pit lane as well. So a race against time between those two versus the number one machine of Cruz, who came in a couple of laps ago as well. So we're going to see who comes out leading the way in the GTD class, while we focus on this fight still between the 26 machine and the 16 LMP2. They've been at each other's throats for pretty much this entire race, and it's good to know that Stephen Phillips, despite getting the move done, he's not been able to pull away. So this fight very much far from done, as well we look to the GTDs, and Luka Vanch is out ahead of Cruz by a measure of about 3.5 seconds. So no change in the lead of the GTDs for now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it looks like it's just our two Bealy Euronics drivers that have made that call on the tyres. Of course, with only taking one side, they don't actually lose any time in the fuel stage, which is why it's kind of such a good strategy to pull if your setup works and you can pull it off as a driver. But yeah, it's interesting to note that no other drivers seem to have done that from what I can see. We're on board with one of our LMP2 drivers. We've got Salvacine again, I think, up against Phillips, who we've seen fighting for the entirety of this race, it seems, with some incredibly daring moves. Down into turn number one, you can see the gaps, you know, hovering around about 0.4 of a second. And it's interesting because these drivers look so close on pace, and it's simply just the tow and the traffic that's separating them. I think definitely going into our pit stops, which won't be happening in too long for our LMP2 drivers, it'll be interesting to see if one of them can pull a sizable advantage. I really don't think they will, but it's also important to note, with the battling that they're doing, they're allowing Herzog back into this battle in the number 13 car behind, who definitely could spice this up a little bit, and especially if he's done better fuel mileage, could end up jumping them come the stops.
For sure. I mean, yeah, they've definitely got to look out. Maybe did get a little bit too complacent fighting a little bit too soon or a little bit too hard. Has drawn in the 13 machine just in behind of Herzog, as you very much correctly did say. I mean, you can see him now, and the threat is real. I mean, there's no denying it at this point. They are in trouble. Particularly, I would say, Kim Salvesen. He's going to have to turn into a driver that's looking both forwards and backwards. And, Will, I mean, you've certainly got a lot more racing experience than I do in that fact, and definitely in more competitive fields where drivers are so close. If you're in Salvesen's position, what do you do? Do you focus backwards or forwards? I mean, surely it's quite an overwhelming position for him to be in.
Well, as we see them dive to the pit lane, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You know, as a driver, you're never looking backwards, or you certainly shouldn't be, because it's really easy to then make a mistake, for example. As we do see a very close entry from Salvesen. I think it was okay. It was very safe on the pit entry in terms of slowing it down to make sure we didn't get a penalty, but Salvesen is going to lose quite a lot of time there, and we could see, you know, under pressure in those situations coming into the pit lane, we could see a gap emerge, and not only a gap emerge, but Herzog managed to make the jump here.
a decent gap as well as they exit. I mean, decently up to speed was Phillips before Sylvester even got going again. A fight a little bit further up as well in pursuit of P7, a little bit further up with the P2s. This is Quentin Vandura in 7th place at the moment. He's got Pogensi just in behind, and well, Pogensi had a bit of a spin a little bit earlier on. I mean, caused the bit of a kerfuffle the following hairpin we're going to go to in just a moment, but is recovering fairly well as that 27 machine and pushing up and onwards to sort of the midpoint in the LMP2 field. But with only 13 minutes left to go, time not really on their side, is well, getting a little bit argy-bargy. We're on the GTPs into the Schumacher S. That's certainly not really something you want to be doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so much pressure on these drivers now to get through this traffic clean and to kind of not mess up, especially around this pit sequence phase, especially when you can make positions up. Again, it's another one of those situations like we saw last lap where the drivers are so close that, you know, just that mistake into pit lane on being too far over the speed limit or having to massively slow to avoid a penalty of the average speed in the pit lane, it can cause issues. I think with these drivers here at the minute, the most important thing is that they keep it out of anyone's doors, any crashes, any more contact. And in terms of a pass, I could see probably it happening in pit lane. It usually does happen in pit lane. However, they are pretty close, and we definitely could see some form of movement when they're passing these GTDs within this next lap.
Potentially so, and yeah, well, with 12 minutes left to go, it is certainly crunch time. The pressure is building as you approach the checkered flag, and Pugnesi having a bit of a look maybe into the next right-hander as they round off the first sector of the circuit, emerging side by side again, using the traffic to full effect. The 27 machine backing out of it, and both of them lapping the Lamborghini GTD. So as it stands, it is still Vandura that leads Pugnesi in this fight for 7th, but well, he had a good look. I don't understand why he would want to back out of that one. Was it just taking an air of caution, not wanting to risk any contact? But in all fairness, he probably could have had a good chance if it had just kept the throttle in.
I think that it's not that really. I think it can be down to the traction and how you kind of get the run off the corner. Of course, when you're going off the wider line, you're able to build more speed. Of course, you're taking a longer distance around the outside, but it allows you to accelerate for longer and build up more speed. So depending on the traction that happens and what's kind of at play, as we see them again fighting very, very close as the GTP comes by, it can kind of factor in that where you can't really do anything. Down into the chicane is definitely an interesting place to go with how hard this circuit is. And I know I'm definitely expecting to see them come into the pit lane soon, as we do see Pogensense into the pit lane. And this is interesting now. This is where this pass can happen. You know, we've got 3 GTDs ahead of Quentin. So yeah, this is crunch time really in the pit lane to see whether you can make anything happen.
Yeah, you've just got to put the lap times in, get a best stop as possible. I mean, even as simple as braking for the pit lane as late as possible, carrying as much speed in, hitting your marks, releasing the pit limit as soon as possible. Small things like that can save you tenths, you know, of a second, even as small as that, really do play a factor in a fight that close, as we see Andreas Friedrich leave the pit lane for the GTPs. Also in was Simon Collarts that released John Bennett to lead the way in the BMW M Hybrid V8 as well. So between our 2 race leaders in the top flight of the IMSA iRacing series, it is going to be a similar situation in their battle in the final 10 minutes of this race. McGinn also got a fellow Lamborghini behind in a fight in the GTDs. A lot of little skirmishes, you know, a couple of couplets here and there, skirmishes that manifested into their own independent little fights among all 3 classes. You know, there's plenty to decide in these closing moments.
Yeah, and my eyes are fully on that battle for GTP lead. Simon came out, the number 12, with sizably more traffic than Bennett. So providing Bennett's execution into the pit lane and a good stop, I think it could be really close on the exit.
Could well be indeed. John Bennett now into the pit lane. So all eyes on that fight, that battle between himself and the pole sitter of Simon Corlatz, who's only a few seconds back. He's going to be hoping that he can get that car up to speed very, very quickly, right at the end of the pit lane as well. Looking onto the circuit, it's going to be very, very tight, and I think that he's managed to do it. John Bennett now takes the lead of the race, potentially because of Corlatz's poor run through traffic. John Bennett now leads this race with 8.5 minutes left to go. There is Corlatz only a couple of car lengths behind, but crucially behind.
And I think that comes down to not only traffic, but potentially fuel mileage as well. I don't imagine the swing was 2 seconds, so if I could see the stop times, I would imagine that maybe we saw a shorter stop for Bennett.
Only a tenth.
Only a tenth, so it's, to be honest, then it is all in the swing of the traffic. So I think that, like we say, it was a good call from Bennett not to pit that lap. Obviously, they maybe all had fuel in hand, and now you see that change for the lead. Like we were saying, we were waiting for this pit stop phase, and when we got drivers so close at the front of the field, it's as simple as that. It can really change in a matter of seconds.
For sure, the pendulum can swing one way for the majority of the race, then at a moment's notice it will switch, and has proven many a time in motorsport to do that switch very indiscriminately as well. It doesn't care who you are, where you are, how good your race is going, it will bite, and yeah, for better or for worse. Valentin Boni into the pit lane as well from second place in the LMP2 field, and will then take their final run with 7.5 minutes left to go. But yeah, John Bennett's pit stop throughout the entire lane was 26.6 seconds with an 8.3 second stationary time. Simon Corlatz 27.2 with an 8.4, so only a swing in total of 0.6 of a second. So there's another about 1.5 second discrepancy between the two drivers. Whether that was traffic or a mistake or something or other, something has caused this swing. But now the race is on now, because Simon Corlatz, after leading this entire race up till now sees it slipping away from him. It's either going to demoralize him or motivate him to fight for that win back.
Well, he's switched from the hunted to being the hunter, and that's definitely something I think that most drivers enjoy to do. So, sometimes people really like to play that role where they're being chased down and they feel like they can perform under pressure, but some drivers really struggle to deliver in those moments. I think you see it from the difference within top drivers and how they're able to perform under pressure, especially the top drivers, because you always have an elite bracket of the elite group. And I think what defines a driver is how you can deal with pressure and how you can deal with these situations. So it'll be interesting to see now, as Corlatz has to get through the traffic the same as Bennett, and see whether we can make anything happen in regards to trying to make a move back. Of course, the gap's been going up and down quite a lot, but we'll really see what happens in the next 3 or 4 laps here. But I think Corlat's got a slow down through the S's, which has not helped at all. Actually lost a lot of time, so that could be game over there for Corlatz.
Nail in the coffin. I think it's from bad to worse. Oh, actually, indeed, for the number 4, going to slow him down. Not necessarily with a penalty, just sheer mistake has allowed Corlatz to regain another second or so, back down to a 1.5 second gap between the two. It's mistakes like that can decide things. Fortunately for Bennett, Corlatz had already been given a slowdown, so not an ideal lap for either of them. But, I mean, it sort of cancelled itself out in the end of it, as we can see our race leader lapping one of the leaders in the LMP2. Speaking of, Leidinger, 10 seconds clear of teammate Valentin Boni. It looks like we're in for our first repeat winner of the season, Will.
Well, we don't want to see any more jinxes tonight, but yeah, definitely could be the case. Only 5 minutes left now on the clock this evening. But, if I'm Corlatz there, I'm absolutely kicking myself. That's a really large opportunity where if Corlatz hadn't have made that mistake, he would have had a run at Bennett, and that's something that could end up being what decides this race this evening. They both made mistakes on the same lap, but if Corlatz has made his later or not made his at all, we could see a different leader going on to lap number 24.
Let's have a bit of a look. I mean, let's wait it out, really. Only time will tell when it comes to races like this. Not necessarily out and out a brawl on circuit, more a strategical mind game stance for the race so far. But again, 4 minutes left to go, and in any of those 4 minutes and any of the remaining few laps that we have got, anything can happen and it can switch at a moment's notice. So don't count anything out just yet. Still a lot to uncover. A fight potentially for P3 between Theodoros and Dean Woods in the LMP2s. This is a good fight to sink our teeth into between two of the P2s. They fight for the podium. They're both going to want it. I mean, particularly the chasing car, Dean Woods. They're in 4th. It's so close, yet so far.
Well, they started P2 and P3 on the grid today, so they clearly have similar pace, you know, only a 10th separating them exactly in qualifying. And I think we'll see potentially a fight now into these final 3 or so laps. It's an interesting point of where you're going to make your move and where you're going to try and make it count. Of course, you know, these guys, you know, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th are quite close together. It's probably not enough time for any of these 2 in 3rd and 4th to catch up to Valentin Boni. But I think, you know, we could definitely see a change in order for the podium within the next few laps, depending on how you're able to maximise your laps on these older tyres and make an opportunity work for you.
Again, it's seeing them if/when they come and being able to pounce on them. And really at this stage of the race, you have to pounce on any opportunity that comes your way. Maybe sort of at this point at the start of the race, it's a case of, I don't really want to take that risk. It's not worth it. More will come. But now opportunities are going to be few and far between. You can't take that chance of just saying, I'll get another one. If something comes your way, you have to take it. Similar to a fight now for P6, Kim Salvesen versus Carl Herzog. So Stephen Phillips able to solidify P5 in this race. So it's a fight between the 2 other drivers that we saw in that little triplet a little bit earlier on of Salvesen and Herzog fighting over 6th place. But Salvesen, he's proven to be a mighty force to get past. So Herzog's really got his work cut out from him in the final moments of this race.
Yeah, I don't imagine anything crazy here because they are 2 teammates, of course. So I think we won't see not stopped anyone in the past. I don't expect to see too crazy of a sense as we see some GT3 moves being rather desperate to say the least. But yeah, I mean, it could end up being a little bit spicy. But you know, I expect them to behave themselves as their teammates, and you know, like any good teammate should.
For those of you that don't know, on William Chadwick's recently signed for Altus Esports, of course, on his debut in the Skip Barber series at Road Atlanta, managed to crash into his teammate from 2nd or 3rd, I think, during the race, and unfortunately did send himself out. Granted, there was a bit of netcode, but golden rule of racing is never crash into your teammate. So for the 2nd time this broadcast, I am going to bring it up. So, I mean, again, your teammate, you're going to take an air caution, but in a race like this where nothing's really at stake rather than a bit of pride, surely you're going to get your elbows out with your teammate just that little bit more because you know each other and you just want to have a bit of fun with it, surely.
Definitely can be the case, you know, if you're not particularly fussed over the result of your race too much, you can definitely see teammates end up battling a lot harder. You know, I think there's famous instances of that, of course, across iRacing, and when it's been quite funny actually when teammates have raced each other incredibly hard, likely talking to each other in a voice chat, I imagine. We could see a bit of spiciness towards the end, but at the gap at a 2nd, I don't think we're going to see anything crazy with only 2 laps to go.
For sure, we are very much approaching the final stages. Very, very close. Only about 30 seconds left on the clock as John Bennett rounds the final corner to start the final lap of this race. 1.8 seconds clear of Simon Collarts. And, well, as we tick down onto the white flag, it seems that Will's prediction is coming into the limelight. A fantastic strategy from the number 4 machine did see him take the lead only a few moments ago at the final stages of the pit lane sequence. But now, I mean, 1.5 seconds in 1 lap. Surely it's got to take a miracle for Collarts to claw this back.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just under 4 kilometers to go now for Bennett to solidify this victory here today. Of course, it'd be a tale of opportunities seized, you know, a great pit stop strategy, fantastic in the moment of making it work. And hopefully this is looking like my prediction was bang on at the start of the race.
He's going to be well chuffed with himself, William Chadwick. And I mean, fair play, because John Bennett, both of them did look to be, I guess, quote unquote, the better driver at different points. I mean, Simon Collarts, during the first sort of half of this race, really did take it by storm. But John Bennett sat there quietly waiting for his opportunity to pounce and has done exactly that. I mean, you can only credit him really with praise, really, with how well he's negotiated this race.
Yeah. and into the last sector, it's all about minimizing mistakes. We don't want to see that chicane incident over again, but I'm sure he'll take it easy into the final chicane, as you know, less than 20 seconds to go in the final lap of this race.
Absolutely, and what a race it has been here for round number 9 of Friday night prime time here at the Nürburgring for the IMSA iRacing series. From second place on the grid, it's going to be John Bennett with one more corner left to go. He will see the checkered flag first to take victory for the BMW M Hybrid V8s. John Bennett victorious in the Nürburgring. Simon Collaerts will join him on the podium in second place, but a very hard-fought fight between the pair of them came down to the pit lane. The winner for the LMP2s, the first double winner of this season, Adrian Leidinger for Undercut Sim Racing, takes victory for the Dallara P217s with Luca Wunsch. Well, at the end of it, fairly close actually to the number 1 machine of Cruz, 2.3 seconds back. He's also had a pretty mighty and quiet race.
Yeah, and it all comes down to that tyre strategy. Cruz and Wunsch have been head and shoulders above the rest on pace. You know, we're talking nearly a second a lap towards the end of this race. And, you know, the two Biela Euronics drivers have drove really well, very consistent. And, you know, they've not made many mistakes between the two of them.
Yeah, fair play to them. He's actually slowing down off the final corner, maybe to come home in formation or to give the win actually to Hendrik Cruz. Maybe a slowdown, maybe intentional, but either way, it's the number 1 machine of Cruz that comes across the line to take victory for the GTD class here at the Nürburgring. Luca Wunsch just in behind, actually side by side across the line, so it's going to be Lukas Wunsch. Actually, the timing tower doesn't know. Cruz, Wunsch, whoever, 3.5 tenths separate them as they cross the line, 1 and 2 for the two teammates. What a race it has been. Very, very tight, very, very decisive. And well, only good things to say really as we take a look at the results here as they are. The BMW M Hybrid V8. John Bennett, as we say, took victory ahead of Simon Collaerts and Will Lyon on the podium. Robert Glerum and Noah Chiller, your top 5. Andreas Friedrich, David Soranzo, Alexander Gerber and Dylan Freckleton, the top 9, with the fast lap, of course, going to the pole sitter of Simon Collaerts, a 1:48.94. Looking back to the Dallara P217s, the first repeat winner, Adrian Leidinger, took victory in Magny Cours. He takes another one here in the Nürburgring. The number 3 machine victorious. Valentin Bonney makes it an Undercut Sim Racing 1-2 with Georgios Theodoris, the third man on the podium. Dean Wood, Stephen Phillips, your top 5. Kim Salvesen, Carl Hesag in a late race battle decides 6th and 7th. Mike Hart and Pignesi 8th and 9th, with Moritz Kroner the top 10, with Quentin Van Dura, the last driver of the LMP2 field, there in 11th place. Hendrik Cruz, Luca Wunsch side by side on the run to the line, decides first and second in the GTDs with Iferetti P3. Life Sebastian McGinn 4 and 5 with Pascal Vale P6. Matthew Mohat in P7, just in behind them with Lyde Vasic in P8. Jonathan Clement and Stephen David, the top 10 of your GTD field. And beyond that, only 3 more drivers. Sean Romig, Di Paolo and Mario Salafranca, who did not quite get to the checkered flag after 27 laps of racing, only saw 15 of them, rounds off in the unlucky number 13 space. It has been myself, Zach Sween, and William Chadwick in the commentary booth. And well, Will, what a race that was. I mean, again, the Nürburgring, we knew it was going to be a fairly decent race. I mean, overall, the track lends itself quite well to overtaking, and they proved that here today.
Yeah, very interesting race, and I think aside of the LMP2s, it was pretty exciting. I mean, the LMP2s obviously lower down, we had some really, really good battling at the front of the field, not so, but Leidinger to take his first double win of our broadcast season is really, really impressive. Bennett did a really fantastic job through the pit lane, and Wunsch decided to get a slowdown and give the win to his teammate to ruin my prediction from the start of the race, which I'm not salty about.
He's not at all. 100% Will Chadwick is not salty at all. As you can see there, we take in a week's time to Road America, February 17th. Same time, of course, 8:45 in the afternoon, in the evening, here in the UK, wherever that is around the world. Make sure you tune in with some popcorn, because once again, the IMSA iRacing season takes to the track. Back in the Americas for a 3-race sprint to the end of the first season of 2023. We then go to Detroit and Sebring for rounds 11 and 12. Beyond that, it'll be myself, Zach Sweeney, and Cameron Roger in the booth for that one. But for this evening, myself, Zach Sweeney, William Chadwick, me, Hugo Luis on. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.